Today, I'd like to discuss one of the terrible issues that's confronting our time, and that is the awful problem of drug addiction and drug addiction that leads to death. What can help in this situation? What can help alleviate some of the terrible tragedies that we see happening all around us? Young people dying way too early, and even older people getting involved with this terrible addictions of fentanyl and opioids and other drugs. One of the things that can help in this situation, and Jessica Gregg, the chief medical officer to Fona Health in Portland, Oregon, mentions some of these uh, avenues that could perhaps help to alleviate the intensity of this problem. And that is evidence-based medication that can help those battling addiction. So if there is medication that is available to the addict, just like any disease, any illness, sometimes we need medication that will help us. And if there is medication, and if there's evidence that would back that up, that avenue really should be pursued. But Jessica points out that unfortunately there is a stigma associated with addiction. And there's a stigma associated with medication being used to treat addiction. And a lot of potential cures or helps or aids in this terrible struggle are not used. When you look at it, you say, this does not make sense. Fentanyl and heroin are easier to obtain than the medications that can help the addict, Jessica maintains. So you have a crazy situation here where I can get fentanyl, I can get heroin, but those medications that are going to assist me, there's all sorts of roadblocks to getting them. So you say to yourself, well, why does this situation exist? It's illogical. What are those medications? Jessica mentions two of them. She says methadone, which we have heard about and has been available for a long time, and buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is a medication that really is new to, I think, a lot of us, but can be very effective. So let's kind of take a look at these and see what the pros and cons are, and explore maybe some of the reasons why they have not been as available as they should be. What do those medications do, methadone and buprenorphine? Well, those medications decrease cravings. And so when the cravings are decreased, your usage is going to be decreased. You don't have the same desire for the drug. So that is going to lead, obviously, to less use, and that will lead, obviously, to decreased deaths. So if there is evidence to back this up, it would make sense to pursue these types of medications, obviously. Methadone is what we call a full agonist at the opioid receptor. So the opioid receptor, as part of our brain, has these cravings. And methadone will assist in decreasing those cravings. What happens is it sits on the receptor and it activates it fully, just like morphine, oxycodone, or fentanyl. So when the receptor is fully activated, it's not going to have that desire for the opioid. The difference with methadone is that methadone builds up slowly and sticks around. There are no rapid highs and few deep dives into withdrawal. So because of the slow buildup of the methadone and it stays there, you're not going to have the high and low problem. And the withdrawal symptoms are not going to be there. At the right dose, and that's, of course, a key statement there, at the right dose. So a lot of times in the beginning, there is a back and forth until the right dose is achieved for the patient. Like with any medication that you take, Sometimes it doesn't work initially because of the dosage level. And so you have to experiment with that and get to the right dosage level, and that is very true with methadone. And so at that right dose, it activates the receptor just enough to remove cravings and to stem withdrawal. So that's the sweet spot. You want to remove the craving for the opioid, for the fentanyl, for the heroin. And you also want to make sure that there are no terrible side effects in terms of the withdrawal. So again, the right dose is critical in achieving that. Buprenorphine is what we call a partial agonist. So it occupies the opioid receptors, but only partially activates them. It doesn't fully activate them as methadone does. It decreases cravings and withdrawals without an accompanying high. It's very difficult to overdose on buprenorphine. So the whole problem of the overdose is taken out of the equation. It doesn't have the potency necessary for complete respiratory depression, which of course can lead to death. So the potency is not there. That is going to cause that. So the buprenorphine can really be very effective. Because it binds the receptors tightly, it keeps other opioids from binding on them. So there it is on the receptors, and the other opioids are not going to be able to get to the receptors. When it is in a person's system, it protects them from overdosing on any other opioids. So that's a great protection that it can offer. So you can see with all of these great positive effects, it can be a very effective treatment for the addict. Methadone is stronger than buprenorphine. For users of fentanyl, sometimes it is the only medication strong enough to stem cravings. So that would be obviously the drug of choice for someone who is a user of fentanyl, because you need something stronger. Fentanyl is such a strong drug itself that the strength of the methadone is what is crucial in terms of the way it binds to those opioid receptors. Federal rules, however, make it difficult to access methadone. Patients can only obtain methadone from an opioid treatment program, we call an OTP. For the first 3 months of treatment, they must attend the OTP in person daily to receive their medication, and they get just 1 dose a day. So there are tight rules around methadone, and again, with some good reason, because you don't want people abusing the methadone or selling the methadone or other types of problems with the methadone. Now, that doesn't sound too oppressive in terms of the rules, but let's unpack it a bit more. What are the obstacles to people accessing methadone in this fashion? Well, first of all, how far is the OTP from their home? Maybe it's quite a distance from their home. What about their job and childcare considerations? What about lack of a car? The first dose can be no higher than 30 milligrams. This does not come close to curbing cravings. Thus, patients continue to use opioids on top of the methadone and won't stop using them until enough methadone is built up in the system to attach to the opioid receptors. The problem is then they're continuing to use the opioids because the methadone isn't stemming the cravings initially. So if they test positive for the opioids in the early months, they don't earn take-home doses. So they're penalized because they have these cravings. The methadone doesn't completely stem the cravings. You're not giving them a sufficient dose to do that. And yet they're penalized in the sense they can't access the take-home doses. They remain then tied down to the OCP. They sometimes have to wait in long lines. They have to wait in the cold, in the rain, in the heat. So you can see what the problem is going to be. The user is going to say, hey, wait a minute, this methadone, I'm not getting that much. I'm still having these cravings. I have to wait on long lines. Might be late for my work. Can't hold down my job. It's raining here, and I'm waiting, an hour or two to get my dose. You can see how the frustrations can build in with the methadone system. The buprenorphine was approved by the FDA in 2002. It could be prescribed by a regular doctor in a regular clinic, so you don't need an OCP. And of course, if an OCP isn't convenient, it's not near the home, this is going to be a good option. However, only providers with a special federal waiver and only a maximum of 30 patients at a time. So the provider has to petition for this special federal waiver to use the buprenorphine, and they can only be 30 patients at a time, which, as we know, with the extent of this plague of addiction, is very minimal. Most barriers have now been removed, but most medical prescribers do not prescribe it. So again, some of the barriers have been taken away, but prescribers just do not prescribe it. Many physicians thought it was too complicated. You had to establish all of the federal rules and go through them, and I don't want to bother with that. It's too complicated, too difficult. Most pharmacies don't stock the medication, so how do you get it? There's no availability in terms of getting it at your local pharmacy. Some will have it, but will not fill the prescription. The distributors cap the amount an individual pharmacy can prescribe, so it's limited in that pharmacy, and when the pharmacy runs out, that's it. So where do you go? You have to run around to another pharmacy. Can't find one. Again, it's going to be a difficult situation for the addict. If they cannot get it, they try and it's not available. They go to certain providers. They won't, prescribe it. They're not familiar with it. Well, let's start using it again. And of course, when they start using it again, unfortunately, some will die. Now, what are the objections to these drugs, the methadone and the buprenorphine? The objections are that you're replacing one addiction with another. So the addict is hooked on the opioid, is hooked on the fentanyl, is hooked on the heroin. And you're just giving them another medication. And so what's happening here? What is the answer to that objection? Very important. Addiction is the compulsive use of drugs or alcohol in a manner that makes a person's life worse. That is the key. They're using this drug, they're using alcohol in such a fashion that they can't function. Their life is worse, their life goes down. With methadone and buprenorphine, this is not happening. Their life is actually getting better. So you're not replacing one addiction with another. You're helping cope with an addiction, cope with a craving that is in the person. It's there in the opioid receptors. It's not going to go away magically. It's there. And so, like any condition that a person has, you might need a medication to treat that so you can get better. The problem with these is that they can be misused or they can be sold. So what is the antidote to that? The misusing, the selling of the drugs. Well, you have to prescribe with close attention to the benefits and harms. So you need a supervised program. You have to make sure the person is following the rules and regulations and not abusing it, not selling it to other people. You have to be careful and attentive to that individual person to make sure that that does not happen. There should be no stigma to using methadone or buprenorphine. There should be no shame to using it. And there should be no life-jeopardizing restrictions. That, I think, is a good and clear philosophy to follow in terms of these drugs. Make sure there's no shame involved. Very important. Make sure there's no restrictions that could jeopardize the life of a person. Certainly you need careful supervision, but that's a lot different than having regulations and having obstacles that are very difficult to overcome for the person. So what is needed in terms of a solution to this problem? What is needed is to dismantle the rules around methadone and buprenorphine prescriptions. Incentivize buprenorphine prescriptions and require pharmacies to stock them so that they are readily available. Have the supervision in place. Make sure that the medication is used in a proper way, but have the medication available and don't have a lot of restrictions around it. We are making it too difficult for those who are facing challenges to get these drugs. And when you make something like this too difficult, the problem is going to be that you're going to increase your rate of addiction. And not only that, it's going to lead, unfortunately, to many premature deaths. So we have a solution. People talk about, well, we need more clinics, we need more, longer stays for people to get off the drugs. And there certainly is merit in that type of approach. There are many rehabilitation facilities that have done remarkably well in terms of helping the addicts. But we also have other solutions, medication solutions, that are more easily available, that don't involve a lot of expense in terms of building more clinics, getting more beds available for people, but involve really taking medication to alleviate the problem. It would make sense that we should explore both paths. Certainly more rehabilitation services, more addiction counseling, and those types of services are important, but also using this other great tool that we have. It should be more widely available. It should be easy to access. It should certainly be supervised by those who are prescribing and helping the addict. But it is a good solution, and it is something that is available right now, where we don't have to invest millions and even billions of dollars in treatment facilities.